Your father changed his mind before he died. My children get everything. My stepmother announced it at my father's funeral reception, champagne glass in hand, while his body was still fresh in the ground. She said it with a smile, like she was sharing good news at a dinner party instead of dancing on my grief. Her daughters, my stepsisters Kennedy and Monroe, were already whispering about which bedrooms they wanted in the house where I'd grown up. But what none of them knew was that my father had seen this moment coming, and he'd prepared something that would ensure they never forgot who he really loved. Before I tell you what was in that video, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? And when you hear my father's voice from beyond the grave, tell me honestly, have you ever witnessed justice delivered by someone who could no longer speak for themselves? My name is Felicity. I'm 26 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I buried the only parent who ever truly loved me. My mother died when I was 7. Cancer, the aggressive kind that takes someone from diagnosis to funeral in 4 months. I barely remember her face without looking at photographs, but I remember the feeling of her. Warmth. Safety. The sense that I was the center of someone's universe. After she passed, it was just Dad and me against the world. We lived in a modest house in suburban Philadelphia that my parents had bought when they were newlyweds. Dad worked as an engineer, nothing flashy but steady. He coached my softball team. He braided my hair for school pictures. He sat with me through every nightmare, every scraped knee, every heartbreak. Then he met Vivian. I was 12 when she entered our lives. She was a real estate agent with 2 daughters from her previous marriage, Kennedy, who was 14, and Monroe, who was 13. Vivian was polished in a way my mother had never been, all designer clothes and calculated smiles. She made my father feel young again after years of grief. I couldn't blame him for wanting that. But I knew from the first dinner that Vivian saw me as an obstacle, not a child to be loved. The wedding happened fast, 6 months after they met. Suddenly I had a stepmother who redecorated my mother's house and 2 stepsisters who made it clear that I didn't belong in my own home. Kennedy took my bedroom because it was bigger. Monroe got the basement converted into her personal space. I was moved to the small guest room that still smelled like mothballs. It's only fair, Vivian explained to my father when I protested. They're adjusting to a new home. Felicity's been here her whole life. She can handle a smaller room. That was how it always went. My stepsisters needed more. I could handle less. Every sacrifice was framed as me being the bigger person, the more mature one, the one who didn't need as much attention or resources or love. My father tried. I know he did. He'd sneak into my room at night and apologize for things he felt he couldn't control. He'd take me out for breakfast on Saturdays, just the 2 of us, where he'd ask about my life without Vivian's constant commentary. He put money into a college fund that Vivian didn't know about, opening a separate account at a different bank so she couldn't touch it. This is for you, he told me on my 16th birthday, showing me the statements. No matter what happens, your future is protected. I promise. I held on to that promise through 4 more years of being invisible in my own home. I held on to it through Kennedy's elaborate Sweet 16 that cost more than my entire college fund. I held on to it through Monroe's brand new car while I took the bus. I held on to it as I worked part-time jobs to save for expenses my father's secret fund couldn't cover. I went to college 300 miles away and barely came home. It hurt too much. Every visit meant watching Vivian spend my father's money on her daughters while treating me like a distant relative who'd overstayed her welcome. Then Dad got sick. Pancreatic cancer. The same cruelty that had taken my mother, coming back for my father 20 years later. By the time they found it, he had maybe 6 months. I moved home immediately, taking a leave from my job, determined to be there for his final days the way he'd always been there for me. Vivian was furious. You're disrupting the household, she complained when I set up in the guest room again. Richard needs rest, not visitors. I'm his daughter, I said quietly. Not a visitor. For the next 4 months, I waged a quiet war with my stepmother for access to my dying father. She controlled his medication schedule, his visitors, his phone calls. She intercepted mail and screened his emails. She even tried to convince me that he was too tired to see me on days when I later learned he'd been asking for me. But Dad found ways. He'd text me when Vivian was out. He'd ask the hospice nurse to call me when he was lucid. On his good days, he'd insist I sit with him, and not even Vivian could refuse a dying man's request. 3 weeks before he passed, Dad asked me to help him with something. Vivian was at a spa day with her daughters, a respite she'd complained bitterly about needing because caregiving was so exhausting, despite the fact that I did most of the actual care. "Call Marcus," Dad whispered. Marcus Webb was his attorney, a friend from college who'd handled our family's legal matters for decades. "Tell him it's time." Marcus arrived within the hour. He brought a camera, a notary, and documents I wasn't allowed to read. For 2 hours, my father recorded something behind closed doors while I waited outside, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and grief. When they finished, Dad called me back in. He was exhausted, more tired than I'd ever seen him, but his eyes were clear. "Vivian thinks she's been clever," he said, his voice thin but determined. "She had me sign some papers a few months ago. Told me it was insurance documentation. I was on heavy medication, couldn't see straight." He squeezed my hand. "But I'm not as far gone as she thinks. And I wanted to make sure you know the truth. All of it." "Dad, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that whatever happens after I'm gone, trust Marcus. And don't let them make you doubt that I loved you. You were always my priority, Felicity. Always. Even when I couldn't show it the way I wanted." He died 17 days later. Peaceful, the hospice nurse said. He'd been asking for me all morning, but Vivian hadn't called until it was almost over. I made it in time to hold his hand. To tell him I loved him. To watch the light leave the eyes of the man who had been my entire world. The funeral was a production. Vivian played the grieving widow to perfection, dabbing at dry eyes with expensive handkerchiefs, accepting condolences like she was collecting awards. Kennedy and Monroe flanked her like bodyguards, shooting me looks that made it clear my presence was tolerated, not welcomed. At the reception in my father's house, surrounded by people who'd known him his entire life, Vivian made her announcement. "I know there have been questions about Richard's estate," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "So I want to clear the air. Richard changed his will last year. He wanted to ensure that his family, his whole family, was provided for. My daughters and I will be inheriting the house, the investments, everything." She looked directly at me. "Felicity will receive a small bequest, of course." Her father loved her, but he recognized that Kennedy and Monroe needed more support. The room went silent. I saw pity in some faces, confusion in others. My father's oldest friends exchanged glances that suggested they knew something was wrong. Kennedy was already telling a cousin which room she wanted for her home office. Monroe was discussing renovations with a friend. They weren't even pretending to mourn. Then Marcus Webb stood up. He'd been sitting quietly in the corner, watching the scene unfold with an expression I couldn't read. Now he walked to the front of the room, a laptop under his arm. "Actually, Vivian, there's something else." His voice was calm, professional. "Richard left specific instructions for his estate distribution, and he wanted those instructions delivered in a particular way." Vivian's smile flickered. "The will is very clear. I have a copy. You have a copy of a document that Richard signed under questionable circumstances." Marcus opened the laptop. 3 weeks before his death, Richard recorded a video message to be played in the event that his final wishes were misrepresented. He looked at Vivian with barely concealed contempt. He anticipated this exact scenario. "This is inappropriate," Vivian sputtered. "This is a funeral reception, not a will reading. You chose to announce the will at the funeral reception." Marcus pressed play. "Richard can respond in kind." My father's face appeared on the screen. He was thin, obviously ill, but his eyes were sharp. Alive. Determined. "If you're watching this, I'm gone. And if Marcus is playing this at my funeral, it means Vivian has done exactly what I expected her to do." His voice was weak but steady. "So let me set the record straight." I heard Vivian gasp. My stepsisters had frozen in place, their smug expressions dissolving into fear. 3 months ago, Vivian brought me documents to sign. She said they were for insurance. I was on heavy medication, barely conscious. I signed them. I found out later that what I actually signed was a new will, leaving everything to her and her daughters. My father paused, taking a labored breath. But I also found out in time to fix it. The room was completely silent now. Every eye was fixed on the screen. This video serves as my legal testimony that the will Vivian is holding was signed without informed consent. I was not of sound mind. I was medicated and manipulated. And I am now, in full capacity and witnessed by my attorney and a court-appointed notary, revoking that document entirely. Vivian was shaking, actually trembling where she stood. "My true wishes are as follows." Dad's voice grew stronger, as if the anger was giving him energy. The house where I raised my daughter, where my first wife and I built our life, goes to Felicity. It was always meant to go to Felicity. I only wish I'd had the strength to protect it sooner. Tears were streaming down my face. I couldn't look away from his image. My investment accounts, my retirement savings, everything I built over 40 years of work, goes to Felicity. She is my only biological child. She is the daughter who took care of me when I was dying, who sat with me through the worst of it, who loved me even when I failed to protect her from the people in this room. Kennedy made a strangled sound. Monroe grabbed her mother's arm. Vivian. My father looked directly into the camera, and I swear his eyes were looking directly at his wife. You thought you were clever. You thought you could drug me, isolate me from my daughter, forge documents, and steal what I'd built. But I've been watching you for 14 years. I saw who you were the moment you moved into my wife's house and started erasing her memory. I stayed because I was weak, because I was lonely, because I thought my daughter needed a mother figure. I was wrong. She needed me to be stronger. And I failed her. His voice cracked. My heart shattered. But I won't fail her now. Your daughters, Kennedy and Monroe, will receive nothing. Not because they're bad people, but because they're not my responsibility. They're adults. They have their own father. They never saw me as anything other than a checkbook, and I will not reward that attitude from the grave. Kennedy burst into tears. Monroe was screaming at her mother. You said he was senile. You said he wouldn't remember. Vivian, you will receive exactly what the law requires me to leave a spouse. Nothing more. The house that you redecorated with my money, the cars you bought, the vacations you took while my daughter worked 3 jobs, all of it ends now. Dad's eyes were hard. You married me for security. You're going to learn what insecurity feels like. The video continued for another minute. Dad explained that everything had been filed properly, witnessed by multiple parties, and notarized by a court-appointed official who had verified his mental capacity. He named 2 doctors who had examined him before the recording and would testify if needed. Then his tone changed. Softened. Felicity. He smiled, the same smile he'd given me when I was a child and he was tucking me in at night. I'm sorry I couldn't say this in person. I'm sorry for all the years I let them treat you like you didn't matter. You always mattered. You were the best thing that ever happened to me after your mother. And I hope this video shows you, finally, that I saw everything. I knew everything. And I did the only thing I could do to make it right. His eyes glistened with tears. Live well, sweetheart. Take care of the house. Remember your mother. And don't waste a single day grieving for people who never deserved you. He paused. I love you. I always loved you. And now you have proof. The screen went dark. The silence in that room was unlike anything I've ever experienced. Vivian was sobbing, not elegant widow tears, but ugly, gasping sobs of someone whose entire plan had just collapsed. Kennedy and Monroe were screaming at each other, at their mother, at anyone who would listen. My father's friends were staring at me with expressions that mixed sympathy with something like respect. Marcus closed the laptop. The estate documents are filed. The will is ironclad. Contest it if you want, Vivian, but you'll lose, and you'll pay for your legal fees out of your share. He turned to me. I'll need you in my office tomorrow to begin the transfer process. I nodded, unable to speak. Vivian grabbed my arm as I walked past her. You did this. You manipulated a dying man. I loved him, I said quietly. That's all I ever did. That's all I needed to do. I walked out of my father's house, leaving my stepfamily to their ruins. That was 3 weeks ago. The estate transfer is almost complete. The house is mine. My mother's house. My father's house. My house. Vivian moved out last week. She's staying with Kennedy until she figures out her next steps. Monroe hasn't spoken to her mother since the funeral. Apparently, she blames Vivian for overplaying their hand. I've already started restoring the house, taking down Vivian's cold modern touches, bringing back the warmth my mother created. I found boxes of my mom's things in the attic, hidden away where Vivian couldn't throw them out. Dad must have put them there, protecting her memory even when he couldn't protect himself. The video is saved on my phone. I watch it sometimes when I miss him too much to breathe. Not the angry parts, but the end. The part where he smiles at me and tells me he loves me. That's what I hold on to. Not the justice. Not the money. Not the house. Just my father's voice, telling me I mattered. If you're watching this and you've ever doubted whether someone truly loved you, I want you to know something. Sometimes people can't show their love in the moment. Sometimes they're trapped by circumstances, by weakness, by fear. But that doesn't mean the love isn't real. Sometimes the proof comes later. Sometimes it comes from beyond the grave. And when it does, hold on to it. Let it heal the wounds that doubt created. Your father is watching, and he's so proud of you. If this story spoke to you, drop a comment below. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next.